Allie, and I would like to show you how to do the Hager bracelet. It's going to be featuring a couple of different components that we link together. You can surely change up the way you link these and kind of working through them, but this shows you a modular design and how you can build onto it. If you need any supplies, remember they are below the video in the description. You can do the link there. If you're one of our retreat members that's watching this video, so let's get started. All right, since this is a component piece, we are going to be making a couple pieces and then adding those together. I had you go ahead and make some tubes a couple weeks ago, and we are going to make some tubes again. That was your practice round. We are starting off with 11/0 Delica beads as well as 3mm Potomac pearls, and we're gonna make some tubes. So I have 10 Delica beads on size 6 dragon thread with a stop bead at the end and a size 11 needle. I'm going to have you do peyote strips here, and we're doing 8 rows total. So you're going to, after bead number 10, you're going to add bead on number 11 and then switch the direction that your needle is going from the bottom towards the top to create your first little double here. So you see that little double that's going on there where it looks almost like a brick wall? That is the start of row 3. Row 1 and 2 were put on together with those groups of 10 beads. From now on, you are going to add a total of 5 beads per row, skipping the next bead in line and sewing through the one that follows. Now you can see I have a lot of thread on my needle here, so I don't have to thread the needle constantly. You can do shorter pieces of thread if you just want to do each little component and not have as much to pull through. I have about 4 feet of thread on my needle right now. You're adding a bead, coming out of one of the Delicas, skipping the next one, and sewing into the final. Most of you watching are going to know Peyote Stitch, so this is just kind of a refresher for you. Delicas line up really nicely because of their tubular shape, that cylindrical shape, and you're, again, only going to be adding 5 beads per row. So here is your 5 beads per row, and as you add the last one, you're going through the first bead that you put on, and coming out right before the stop bead. You want to make sure by accident not to sew through the stop bead. That's why your stop beads are often a different color. From here, we're going to go back down the project. Now I sew the best away from me, so I'm actually flipping it so that the stop bead is toward the bottom and I'm progressing towards the top. Add a bead, sew through the first of the 5 beads that are sticking out. And only through those, not through the end one by accident. It's always nice to see that mistakes are made no matter what your level is. Add a bead, sew through the next one. So it becomes very easy after that 3rd row to get established and to be able to tell where you need to sew through. And as you add a bead and sew through the next one, kind of sticking up, that's where you're going to go in and get that peyote look. The peyote look is going to look like a brick wall where you have every other line kind of lining up to one another in a step or a staircase look. So as you finish row 4, you're going to come out towards the end of your peyote stitch. Once again then, I will take it, so that's 4 rows. How do we know that it's 4 rows? You're going to count 2 lines of your peyote. 1, 2, 3, 4. We now need to double this, so we need 4 more rows. Again, I'm gonna flip it over, add 5 more, and we're gonna make it so that we have a total of 8 rows. 4 beads on row number, or 4 beads on line 1, 4 beads on line 2, adding those 2 together to make it to 8. Once you've got 10 high and 8 wide, and you can again count those first 2 rows, 4 plus 4 equals 8, because they sit on that stagger. So there's row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're going to roll this out into a tube. Now, when we roll this out into a tube, we are going to zigzag and zipper close it. We're going to roll it out and we're going to go back through bead number 1 from, or the first bead there in that row of 4. We're then going to come over to bead number 4 in our line there, number 9. We're going to go back to bead number 1 in 8. Bead number 4, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, ready? So here's the magic. We're going to roll it together, go back through number 1 from the line number 10, go back through number 4 from 9, go back through number 1 from 8, 4, 7, 6, sometimes I do 2 at the same time if I can, going through there and kind of seaming it up together. Sorry, I know when this view gets really close, it's sometimes hard to see. And see how as we're going from the 4th bead on the odd numbered rows into the 1st bead on the even number rows, it almost gets that like Frankenstein look if you don't pull tight, that you see those sutures or those stitches going back and forth. Give a nice tight pull and it closes up that gap. It makes it appear like there was never an opening there whatsoever, closes it up completely, and makes a flawless tube, even if it spins like that in your hand. You want to make sure that your starter thread or your stop thread does not get mixed and mingled. So just kind of pull that thread out of there if it starts to want to be part of the party. And then after we're done and we sew through that last and final bead, so I'm coming over here, I'm sewing through my last and final bead, row number 4 from line, or bead number 4 from line number 1. What we're going to do is connect it. So we're connecting it by going down through bead number 1 from that same row. So we're currently at the top of bead number 4. We're going down the bottom of bead number 1. And see how that just completely closes it up? From here, we're going to skip over and go back through bead number 4. So we went up 4, down 1, back up number 4, and that completes our tube. What we're going to do now is add some of our little beads onto our tube in order to connect for our piece. So we are going to sew completely through the tube. So just move that stop bead out of the way. Our tube is closed. Sew completely through the tube, bringing your needle and thread out the opposite end. Grab your pearl bead here. Grab another Delica. Sew back through the pearl, not the Delica, and take your needle and thread straight through that tube. So don't get caught up on any beads that are in the tube, straight through the tube. That 11-0 Delica on the end is just going to act as an anchor to keep our pearl there, but we're also going to use that as a connection point when we go in to build our piece. Add another pearl and Delica for the opposite side, letting that fall down next to your piece. Go back through that pearl and through the Delica tube. One more time now. We're going to go up through the pearl, up through the Delica, that first one, back through that same pearl, out through our tube, down to the opposite end, not through any of the beads in the tube. Give a nice tight pull, take off your stop bead, and there's white thread right next to the white pearl. Grab your 2 thread ends, the thread that's still connected to the needle that you'll make more tubes. We're going to make a total of 7 to 9 tubes depending on your wrist size. Each component that we're building onto will be about 1 inch. So if you know that you've got an 8-inch wrist, you're going to make 9 tubes. If you know that you have a 7-inch wrist, you are going to make 8 tubes. You're making 1 more than the length you need. Go ahead and tie that off. Take your thread burner or your thread zap. Burn that thread edge down close to the project. Right there. And then what we're going to do, sit that off to the side. Grab your needle and thread that you still have a lot of here. Pick up that same stop bead. Put that onto the bottom of your thread, just leaving about 2 inches, enough to knot now that you know what you're doing. Put that thread through there once, thread through there twice, and then we start off again. So remember, you're going to make approximately 8 or 9 of these tubes. Once you have all of your little peyote tubes done, we are going to do the second part of our component. For this, we are going to be using some 6mm Potomac pearls, and we're going to do something very, very simple. I'm keeping this separate component-wise from joining the group, just because it's easier to do this and tie it off and then join all your pieces together. So the first thing you're going to do is, once again, get that stop bead onto the end of your thread. We're going to let that go down to the end just to tie off, just like we've been. And I'm still working with my one piece of thread longer. I've done 4 tubes with that, a total of 7 again, and I'm getting ready to do my wrap around the pearls. So for the wrap around the pearls, you're going to put your pearl onto your thread and needle, and then I want you to put a total of 8 Delicas after the pearls. So there's 5, 6, 7, and 8. Let that drop down next to the stop bead, and we're going to circle back through the pearl, starting at the stop bead and going through towards the top. Now we're going to do the same thing on the other side. 8 more Delicas. And once you have those 8 Delicas on, we're wrapping to the opposite side of the pearl, going once again from the stop bead up towards the top, putting those 8 pearls around the outer edge. From here, I'm going to go back through the first side of beads, going through all 8 of them. When I get to the end of those 8, I'm going to pick up a 9th bead. What that's going to do is close up the gap here at the end. Move your stop bead out a little bit. Just pick up one more bead and then sew through the line of seed beads on the opposite edge. So I'm sewing through the 8 over here, and then just like we did on the opposite side, add one more Delica and back through that set of 8 again. Once we get back through that set of 8 again, you can see that you have a nice complete row around your pearl of your Delica beads. Move your stop bead out of the way a tiny bit. And once your thread and needle are close to that starter thread, right where mine are coming out here, I'm going to take that and I'm just going to tie it off and be done. Simplest little component ever, getting those Delicas wrapped around the pearl. So just like we did the tubes, if you know that you have an 8-inch wrist, you were doing 9 tubes, you're going to do 8 beads. If you know you have a 7, you're going to do 8 tubes and 7 beads. So however many inches you need your bracelet to be, that's how many of this center pearl row you're going to do. So I'm going in here and I'm going to burn off those thread edges. Nice and close. There. And then I'm going to, once again, start my next one. So again, I'm going to take that thread stop, or that stop bead rather, take it off, and get ready to do my next component. So again, we're starting over with this piece, and then we're going to use our tube beads as well as our crystals and some more of our smaller 3mm pearls to link these together as we put each pearl in between our rows of our tubes. So now it's time to connect the 2 of these together. I'm going to bring it back just a little bit so you can see a little bit more of this angle. We're going to be adding our tubelets and our 4mm bicones, and we are connecting them to our pearl as well as to our tubes. I currently have a tube and my stop bead of my thread coming out through the end of the tube, or through the end of the Delica rather, at the end of one of our peyote tubes. I want you to grab a tubelet as well as a 4mm bicone. You're going to go into your pearl here and into those seed beads, and I want you to sew over through 3 Delica beads. 1, 2, and 3. And come on out. From here, I want you to grab another 4 and another tubelet and another peyote tube going into that last bead. And see, right now you have kind of that line up there going on. Oops, a little line up here going on to the piece. We are going to go through the pearl, through the tube, whole way over to the other side of the tube, and do the same thing on the opposite side. Now what's going to be important for this is that you make sure that you're going through the 3 beads along the side that match perfectly in position to the 3 beads on the original pearl. That's the most important thing here. So when I look, I want to make sure that the 3 beads that I'm grabbing on this side sit perfectly across from the 3 beads from the original pearl. So coming out there, once again, we're grabbing our tubelet, we're grabbing our 4mm. I can look and draw a line. You're going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 beads. We're going to sew through the next 3, 1, 2, 3, and then do the same thing again. And we're going to grab a 4mm and our tubelet and go to the top of that tube that you were coming out of and go through the Delica. Now you can see that lineup of how we're getting that crisscross look. We're going to add more for stability, and we're going to sew into the actual tube itself. So I'm going to come down through the pearl. I'm going to sew through my tube and let my needle naturally come out somewhere on the tube. It doesn't matter where, honestly. What we're going to do is look at the line where we came out, and we want to come out through the 3rd bead. So the 3rd bead of any line, because this will rotate, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm looking 1, 2 in right here. The next one, 1, 2, 3. Hey, look, here's my opportunity to come out of that 3rd bead. So I'm going to sew on an angle, and I want to come out of the 3rd or the middle bead of one of the rows. The 3rd bead is the middle. From here, we're going to do our connection. Our connection is a 3mm pearl followed by a 4mm bicone. 3mm pearl, 4mm bicone. And now we're going into the middle of our beads along the sides here from that middle grouping of our 8 beads. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 beads. Where are we going to sew between? We are going to sew between and catch onto the thread between bead number 3 and number 4. So see how I'm sewing underneath the thread, making sure my thread stays in between beads 3 and 4, and then I'm going to tuck it up and sew back through the crystal and back through the seed bead. So your thread's not actually around or going through any beads, it's just around the thread that's between them. And see how that pulls that in nice and close? Coming up to the tube then here, you are going to go back through that same bead that your thread is coming out of. You're going in the opposite side. So in my case, my thread was coming out the bottom of that Delica bead. So I went into the top, bringing my needle out towards the bottom. And that's your one connection side. From here, we need to do the other connection side. How are we going to get there? Easiest way to get there is to reinforce what we just did. Go back into the tube, kind of fish your needle around, or you can bring your thread and needle back through the pearl, back through the bicone. This is going to be your faster way to get there. Then go into your row of seed beads and let your needle travel the whole way around that row of seed beads, all the way around till you're coming out through those beads that lay on the opposite side. So I'm rotating the whole way around here, coming out through that middle, between those middle 2 beads. Remember, it's a group of 6, so I'm coming out between beads 3 and 4, right there. I'm in line, add a bicone, add a tiny pearl, go over to your tube here on the opposite side, pick the 3rd one in our row, 1, 2, and 3, sew through that 3rd bead there, right along here. Once you come out through that 3rd bead there in line, go back down through the pearl and the bicone again. Give a nice tight pull. Wrap your thread around between beads 3 and 4, just like we did on the other side to stay consistent with your fit. And then go over, back through your beads here, along the side. And when I'm here next to my bicone, oops, I went one too far. I'm going to get ready to start my next connection point. So here's my first little connection point. It looks beautiful, almost has that bow look. I'm going to go through that Delica bead here at the top. And guess what? I'm going to add a second Delica. So I'm going to add another Delica and then begin my process again. On goes my tube, on goes my 4mm. I'm going to pick up one of my seed beads here. I'm going to sew through 3 beads. Bring my needle and thread out. Do another bicone, tubelet, and another tube. Oops. So it's just the same thing now, over and over, making sure that I'm connecting. So I'm going to go back through this here, down through the tube to the opposite side. Give a nice tight pull to get that thread nice and tight. Go through your Delica bead here along the edge. Repeat your pattern, going in and adding a tubelet, adding a 4mm, counting over, making sure you're going through the same 3 beads on the opposite side. You don't want to have it mismatched there. From here, you're going to use your 4mm, another one of your tubelet beads. Let me get one more out here. Add another one of your Delica beads and then sew down through the pearl. Wiggle your thread and needle till you come out of your tube. So you want to go through that pearl there, and wherever you come out the tube, you can snake around to get to that 3rd bead. Now, when you start doing more than one of the components and adding them together, you want it to sit about opposite the other side so it's not pulling up or down. So I'm sewing over here along my peyote stitch, and you've all done enough of the peyote that you kind of know where that is. I'm eyeballing it and saying that's coming out of bead number 2. Let's come out of bead number 3. How many rows over is this? And just kind of feel it out for what is the correct fit. What I like to do is hold it, sit it down, and say if I brought my pearl out of here, is that tube going to sit correctly? Yes, it's going to sit correctly. Great. Add my 3mm. And you can do whichever order you want. If you would have rather had the pearl close to the pearl, you can certainly do that. Once you get in there, go over and say, okay, here's my 3 beads in the middle. I'm going to sew right between there, getting that line of beads back up through. Then your crystal and your 3, making sure that thread stays right in that spot between beads 3 and 4. Go on over and say, which side was this coming out of? Oh, it needs to come out the other side. Perfect. So into that opposite side of that same seed bead. Come back down through your pearl and your crystal. And then once again, go through all your seed beads to get to the other side and repeat. So you can see it looks complicated. You have to do a little bit of counting, but once you get it, it's very, very consistent. If you want to change up some colors, you can change up the Delicas so you know exactly where you're coming in and out of. After you exit through the 3rd bead there, after your side, go ahead and we're going to do our last little connection there, adding in our pearl, and I need another one of my crystals here to continue this beautiful bracelet. This can be done as a necklace, it can be done as a pair of earrings also, where you just kind of do that center that you're hanging down. Once again here, going up to the 3rd bead in one of the peyote stitch rows, just sewing through that 3rd one. And at any time too, you can stop or start the thread, just knotting it off. Going back down through my pearl and my crystal, wrapping my thread around the thread there. Nice and tight, making sure I'm wrapped between the beads that I need to be wrapped between. Remember, between beads 3 and 4. Going back up through the crystal, up through the pearl, and then whenever and whichever way you want, going through to come out the end of that pearl and the peyote. So this time I'm just going to go through here and run my thread and needle through the peyote on an angle, nice and easy. Then I'm going to go through my purl. Once I come to the end, go through the purl there, come out through the top of the purl, add on my next Delica bead, and continue to go. So Delica bead gets added to kind of even out the sides. Get ready for my next middle, get ready for my next tubelets. When you're connecting your last component, we're going to come out the side and we are going to add our clasp. Now, what happens if your project is not long enough or too long, etc.? You can see mine's a little bit long because my wrist is shorter than a 7-inch wrist and I still have my clasp to go. So another option is to actually stop and add the clasp onto your pearl. So you would basically stop here and then your clasp would connect to the pearls in the end units. So as you're building along your bracelet here, you want to stop a couple times and make sure the fit is accurate. What I've done is come out my last pearl and sewn directly through my tube. I'm then going to pick up my beautiful clasp guarding clasp here, sewing through it, and then looking at the tube right about where you are, you want to sew through another bead next to it, and then we're going to snake through our peyote stitch, going through on the side here, making sure when you sew through the peyote stitch that as you're sewing through you don't want any thread to show. So I'm going to go to the next piece here that's directly next to, or the next bead here rather, and the next one after that, kind of sewing down. You can see I'm pulling that clasp in. If you want to, you can take the tongue off also, a little bit less weight to carry. And then I'm going to reverse the thread back to the bead that my thread is currently coming out of for my clasp. If you want a wire guard, you can certainly use that as well. Going up through the clasp, and I'm going to make sure to repeat this a total of 3 individual times. Going back through that same bead, this time I'm going the opposite direction. You want at least 3 passes through your clasp section because you do not want your clasp to come off. So I'm going back through again here. You can see I'm on an angle. Go in here and I say, okay, I need to get back to this bead here. That's another one that's right next to it. Come on out there of your peyote stitch. And then I'm right there next to the portion. Oh, I went one too many beads here. Right there next to the portion where I have to go through the clasp again. After you go through the clasp again, what you're going to do is take your thread, weave it back through the design. And when I say back through the design, I'm just talking that last bar. So there's my 3 times. I'm going to weave it back through the back. And you can see here I need to do some thread burning here along my edges on a bunch of my different pieces. Got my thread sticking out there. So after I finish off all my ends, grab that thread burner and burn down your edges. From here, I'm just going to snake back through the design, letting my thread and needle naturally go through the peyote up and down, different ways. By doing so, you're locking your thread in place. And then when I can, I'm going to go underneath the bridge thread, see if it'll let me here. Go through there. Pull my needle through a loop that I've created. Give a nice tight pull. Go through another section of my peyote stitch here. Once again, reversing the thread. And then go in and burn off my thread ends. Right down smack next to my clasp. On the opposite side, I'm going to weave some thread in through and then attach my tongue. Noted, when you attach your tongue, I always like to make sure and put on my bracelet. You can see here I can do 1 whole less unit with my smaller wrist. But you want to attach your tongue so you make sure that as you're doing it, the tongue sits the correct way because there is a top and a bottom. So go ahead and put that tongue in, and as you add thread and get ready to do it on the other side, do the first 2 loops through the clasp where it's attached to one another. That way you make sure your bracelet does not flip. Once you're finished with your Hager bracelet, you can see the beauty that it is just in the way that it lays, the way that it fits, and all of that different time and effort that you put into the components. Again, if you want to make a matching pair of earrings, take the bar, hang some things down, wrap a couple of the smaller beads as well. Lots of options when you're working on your design. Thanks everyone so much for joining me for the Hager bracelet. I'm really excited to have you be in the mindset of mixing and matching components and doing modular designs that you can build off of, build onto, make shorter, longer into necklaces, etc. Remember, if you do need any supplies, go ahead and look below the video in the description. We'll put the links there. Don't forget, if you haven't already, to subscribe so you don't miss anything from us here at Potomac Beads, like future bead retreats and ideas and suggestions. Thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for more inspirational designs.